Hello, friends, and welcome back to The Snoozy Scientist, where we gently explore the mysteries of our world, one sleepy yawn at a time. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend a little piece of your evening, your morning, or perhaps somewhere peacefully in between, winding down with me. Tonight, we're traveling back more than 20,000 years to an age when our world stood on the very brink of frozen extinction. Imagine a world where every breath stings like ice, where food is so scarce that survival becomes a daily miracle, and where every shadow conceals a predator waiting to strike. For the creatures of this world, each dawn was not a promise of life, but a question. Will this be the last? This was not just winter. This was Earth at the height of the Ice Age. Glaciers as tall as skyscrapers swallowed entire continents. Oceans drained away, falling more than 400 feet, exposing strange new coastlines and vast land bridges that would change the course of human history. And across Europe, the air turned 20 to 30 degrees colder than it is today, enough to turn forests into tundra and grasslands into frozen desert. How could herbivores graze in a land where almost nothing grew? At its peak, one-third of the earth vanished beneath unrelenting ice. Extinction hovered over every creature, from the mighty mammoth to the smallest insect. By every measure, life should not have endured, and yet somehow it did. But how? How did colossal mammoths and saber-toothed cats withstand the brutal conditions and endless hunger? How did fragile humans with little more than fire, stone tools, and each other manage to survive in a nightmare that should have wiped us out? And why did some creatures vanish forever while others still walk beside us today? Tonight, we'll step softly into this frozen world of endless ice and silence to uncover how, against all odds, anything at all managed to survive. But before we begin, if you find comfort in these gentle journeys through science stories, it would mean the world to me if you gave this video a gentle like and perhaps tapped subscribe. It helps more curious minds like you find their way to this peaceful little corner of the internet and lets the algorithm know that sleep and science belong together. And if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from tonight and what time is it there? I love seeing how far across the world these soft explorations travel. Now take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, close your eyes if you'd like, and together let's step quietly into the frozen age when Earth stood on the brink of extinction and life somehow found a way to survive. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, survival often meant living with fear. Every step across the tundra carried risk. For the giant herbivores that roamed the land, danger came not only from the cold or from hunger, but from predators with a patience that seemed almost endless. Lurking in the tall grasses of the steppe, or crouched in the shadows of the sparse forests, were creatures that looked as if they had been designed purely for killing. These were the saber-toothed cats. Their bodies were stocky and powerful, muscles packed tightly across broad shoulders and chests. Their legs were short compared to modern big cats, but every step was a coil of strength waiting to be unleashed. What made them truly unforgettable, however, were their teeth. Each saber-tooth carried fangs as long as 6 inches, curving down from the top of the jaw like ivory daggers. These were not teeth meant for quick bites or for holding prey. They were weapons, sharpened by evolution to pierce deeply into flesh, designed to strike at vulnerable points like the throat or belly. Against a mammoth or a bison, they could be the difference between survival and starvation. Unlike the lions and leopards we know today, saber-tooths were not built for long chases across open land. Their bodies were heavy, their stride not meant for endurance. Instead, they were ambush predators. They waited silently, blending into the landscape, eyes fixed on a chosen target. When the moment was right, they burst forward with terrifying speed, using surprise as their greatest advantage. A single leap could knock down a young mammoth or a horse. With claws digging into flesh and teeth sinking into vital areas, the attack was swift, ruthless, and final. For the herds that roamed the Ice Age plains, this meant that every shadow could hide death. Imagine being a young bison separated from your mother for just a moment, wandering too close to a thicket of shrubs. In an instant, a saber-tooth could explode from hiding, its roar mixing with the pounding of hooves and the screams of startled animals. The air would fill with snow and dust as the herd scattered, leaving one unlucky creature caught in the predator's grip. For the saber-tooth, the kill was not just a matter of instinct, it was survival, a desperate attempt to keep itself and its cubs alive in a world that gave nothing easily. For thousands of years, this strategy worked. Saber-toothed cats lived across vast stretches of the Americas and beyond, dominating their frozen territories. They fed on giant ground sloths, ancient horses, camels, and of course the young of mammoths and mastodons. Fossil evidence suggests they lived in groups, perhaps similar to modern lions, sharing food and working together to bring down large prey. In tar pits like those at La Brea in California, the bones of saber-tooths have been found in extraordinary numbers, a silent record of their once powerful presence. But there was a cost to this specialized design. The long fangs that gave the saber-tooth its advantage were also its weakness. They were fragile compared to other teeth, prone to breaking if used carelessly, and the heavy body that made them such effective ambush hunters limited their ability to adapt. As the Ice Age began to shift, as prey grew scarcer and landscapes changed, the saber-tooth found itself struggling. Its ambush tactics required large herds of slow-moving animals. When those herds dwindled, so too did the predator that depended on them. Still, in their time, they were monsters of the ice, rulers of fear. They were creatures that lived in silence, in patience, and in sudden violence. To step into their world is to step into a place where survival was not measured by strength alone, but by the ability to surprise, to strike with precision, and to cling to life in a frozen wilderness that tested every living thing. And as we think of these predators waiting in the frost, hidden from sight until the last moment, our eyes turn naturally to the giants they stalked. Herds of woolly mammoths, moving like fortresses of fur and tusk across the tundra, became both the prey and the rivals of the saber-tooth. Across the frozen plains of the Ice Age, few sights could have inspired both awe and fear quite like the herds of woolly mammoths. They moved together across the tundra like living fortresses, each individual enormous in size, yet bound to the others by the rhythm of migration and the search for food. From a distance, the dark line of their shaggy bodies appeared almost like a moving wall against the horizon, a wall of life pushing through a landscape where survival was never guaranteed. Mammoths were among the true giants of their time. Standing up to 14 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing as much as 10 tons, they were colossal even by the standards of Ice Age megafauna. Their very bodies were built for endurance in the cold. Long coats of coarse hair and a soft, insulating underlayer trapped precious heat against their skin. Beneath that thick hide lay layers of fat, sometimes more than 4 inches deep, a reserve that allowed them to endure when blizzards raged and food grew scarce. Their ears were small and rounded, unlike the broad ears of modern elephants, a simple yet vital adaptation to conserve warmth in the freezing winds. But perhaps the most striking feature of the woolly mammoth was its tusks, spiraled and curved, stretching as long as 16 feet from end to end. These ivory weapons were tools of both survival and power. They could sweep aside snow to uncover frozen grasses. They could be used to spar with rivals during the mating season. And in times of danger, they became spears that could defend against predators bold enough to attack. To imagine the life of a mammoth is to imagine a constant struggle between hunger and endurance. The Ice Age tundra was not lush or forgiving. Grasses and sedges grew in patches across the steppe, along with mosses and shrubs that barely poked through the frost. A single mammoth could eat hundreds of pounds of vegetation in a single day, so a herd on the move was always racing the limits of the land. When food thinned, the herd pressed forward, wandering vast distances across plains, rivers, and frozen valleys in search of sustenance. For the young, each step of this journey was a lesson in survival. For the old, it was a test of strength that many did not pass. Predators watched their movements constantly. Saber-toothed cats lurked at the edges, patient and calculating, knowing that even the mightiest herd had weak points, a young calf that strayed too far from its mother, or an old mammoth slowed by age, could fall victim to a sudden ambush. When the attack came, it was chaos. Trumpeting cries shook the air as the herd tightened into formation, mothers circling their calves, tusks flashing against the snowy backdrop. In those moments, the mammoth's size and unity became its greatest defense. A single cat might strike with precision, but against a wall of tusks and trampling feet, even the fiercest predator risked its life. Humans too became enemies and rivals of the mammoth. For early hunters, bringing down one of these giants meant meat, hide, bone, and fat enough to sustain a community through harsh weeks. Yet the task was immense. Spears and cunning were no match for a charging mammoth in the open, so people learned to work together, setting traps, driving the animals into bogs or over cliffs, and striking only when the moment offered a chance of success. To stand against such a creature demanded bravery and desperation in equal measure, and always starvation lingered in the background. Winters stretched long and merciless, and summers were brief. When food was scarce, herds grew thin and restless, calves weakened, their cries fading as the icy wind carried them away. In those times, the mammoth's great size was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed them to store strength and endure, but it also meant they needed so much more to stay alive. A hungry mammoth could strip a patch of land in hours, leaving behind only frozen soil and silence. Yet despite all these trials, the mammoths endured for thousands upon thousands of years. They were creatures that embodied the strength and fragility of the Ice Age itself, their lives a delicate balance of resilience and vulnerability. They marched endlessly across the tundra, mobile fortresses of fur and ivory, carrying with them the memory of survival in a world that seemed determined to erase them. From the shadows, predators like saber-tooths tested their defenses, and from the forests and valleys, humans tracked their movements, drawn by the promise of sustenance. The mammoth stood at the heart of this struggle, a symbol of both abundance and peril in the frozen age. And where the mammoths moved, so too did the fate of the predators that hunted them, the humans who pursued them, and the fragile balance of life that clung to the cold. As the herds of mammoths marched across the tundra and saber-toothed cats waited in silence for the chance to strike, another predator roamed the frozen world. They were not as massive as the great cats, nor as imposing as the mammoth, but their power lay in something different, something far more terrifying for those who became their prey. These were the dire wolves, legendary hunters that thrived not through strength alone, but through unity. Dire wolves were larger than the gray wolves we know today. Their bodies were heavier, their jaws broader, and their teeth stronger, designed to crush bone and tear through thick hides. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they looked familiar to us, almost like the wolves that still roam forests and plains, but they carried an extra weight of menace. Where a single wolf might not have been a threat to a giant herbivore, an entire pack of dire wolves was a moving storm, relentless and coordinated. The cold plains of the Ice Age offered little mercy, and food was scarce enough to test the limits of every predator. For the dire wolves, the solution was cooperation. They hunted not as individuals, but as a collective force, each member of the pack taking a role in the chase. Some drove the prey forward, others flanked from the side, while still more followed close behind, ready to strike the moment the animal began to falter. Their prey were not small or weak creatures. Dire wolves targeted bison, camels, ancient horses, even the calves of mammoths when chance allowed. To see them descend on a target must have been a sight of chaos and terror. The snow churned to powder under hooves and paws, the air filled with howls, trumpeting cries, and the heavy thunder of pursuit. One of the most remarkable things about the dire wolf was its ability to face prey many times larger than itself. A single bison could weigh 10 times more than one wolf, yet when surrounded by the pack, even giants could be brought down. With powerful jaws, they clamped onto legs, throats, or flanks, dragging the animal down through sheer numbers. Each bite weakened the prey until it fell, and then the entire pack fed, each member taking a share. This bond of cooperation not only allowed them to survive in such a harsh world, but it also gave them an edge over solitary hunters. A saber-tooth might strike with precision, but a dire wolf pack could overwhelm through persistence and numbers. The bones of these predators tell us much about their lives. At the La Brea tar pits in what is now California, thousands of dire wolves have been found, their remains trapped for eternity in sticky pools of asphalt that once lured in desperate animals. A bison or horse, weakened and trapped in the tar, would attract scavengers and hunters. Packs of dire wolves, drawn by the promise of easy prey, would rush in, only to find themselves caught as well. Layer upon layer of bones, preserved over thousands of years, reveal a chilling story of both abundance and tragedy. These fossil beds hold the skulls and fangs of dire wolves in staggering numbers, evidence of how many once roamed the land and how often their hunger brought them into danger. When we picture a dire wolf, it is tempting to imagine a solitary figure, a shadow crossing the snow, but their true strength was in their numbers, in the chorus of howls that would have echoed across the frozen valleys at night. Their voices carried not just communication, but unity, reminding every creature that to cross their path was to face not one enemy, but many. For early humans wandering into these lands, such sounds must have been unsettling, a reminder that even fire and stone could not erase the danger of the pack waiting beyond the light of the flames. As dire wolves pursued their quarry, they shaped the balance of life across the Ice Age. The bison that thundered across the plains, the horses that grazed in the frost-bitten grasses, even the young mammoths that clung close to their mothers, all felt the presence of the pack. To survive was to remain vigilant, to stay within the herd, to avoid being the one who fell behind. And so, as we leave the howls of the dire wolves echoing across the tundra, we turn to another kind of hunter, not one of claw and fang, but one that seemed far less prepared for this frozen world. Humans, fragile and hairless, daring to walk into the kingdom of predators, carried a weapon no other creature possessed, a secret that would change the fate of every species they encountered. The tundra was already full of dangers. Herds of mammoths moved like armies across the plains, saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows, and dire wolves howled together in the night. Yet into this harsh kingdom of predators and prey stepped an unlikely figure. They were small compared to the giants of the Ice Age, fragile compared to the predators with claws and fangs, and bare-skinned against the cold. They were humans, hairless apes who carried no natural weapons of tooth or tusk, but who brought something far more powerful into the frozen wilderness. At first glance, it seemed impossible that such beings could endure a world of endless ice. The cold alone could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Predators towered over them, faster, stronger, and deadlier in every way. And yet, humans dared to push into the glacial frontiers, moving out of the warmer refuges and into lands shaped by snow, wind, and hunger. Their survival depended not on muscle or speed, but on the strange gifts of mind and cooperation. Fire became their greatest ally. In a landscape where blizzards howled and the nights lasted long, fire meant warmth and safety. A single spark coaxed into flame could keep death at bay. It allowed meat to be cooked, making it easier to digest and unlocking more energy from each meal. Smoke from the flames kept insects away during warmer seasons, and light from the fire gave comfort when predators prowled in the dark. More than that, fire was a shield. Animals that might stalk humans hesitated before the flickering glow, cautious of the heat and the unfamiliar movement of the flames. Around each fire, a small circle of safety opened in the vast hostile night. Yet fire alone would not have been enough. What made humans truly different was their ability to share, to teach, and to cooperate. One individual could not hope to face a mammoth, but a group working together could turn even the largest beast into a source of food, clothing, and tools. They planned hunts with strategy, using their voices and gestures to coordinate, learning from one another how best to track, to stalk, and to strike. Knowledge that might have vanished with a single life instead passed from one generation to the next, building layer upon layer of wisdom. Tools became an extension of their survival. Stones shaped into sharp edges, cut through thick hides. Spears with fire-hardened tips reached farther than any claw or fang. Later, bone and antler were carved into more refined tools, each one a testament to imagination in the face of necessity. Humans did not need to be the fastest or the strongest when they could create something entirely new. A single stone blade in the right hands could change the balance of life and death. As they spread into the frozen lands, humans carried with them a social bond, unlike that of other predators. They cared for one another in ways that went beyond instinct. The old and injured were not always left behind. Sometimes they were protected, even fed by the group. This cooperation strengthened the whole community. Children grew under the watchful eyes of many, learning not just through trial, but through the stories and teachings of their elders. Around the fire, language began to shape survival. Words, gestures, and shared symbols allowed experiences to be passed along, giving each new hunter and gatherer the advantage of the knowledge that came before. In this way, humans carved out a place for themselves in the Ice Age world. Their bodies were not built for the cold, but they fashioned clothing from the hides of the very animals they hunted. Their hands were not tipped with claws, but they held spears that struck from a distance. Their skin offered no protection, but their minds built shelters from bone, hide, and earth, turning fragile beings into survivors of the most unforgiving climate on Earth. Still, the world around them pressed back at every moment. Day was a gamble against hunger, cold, and the predators that saw them as easy prey. Yet what set humans apart was not just their ability to endure, but their ability to adapt. They learned to see patterns in the movement of herds, to anticipate seasons, and to read the signs of the changing land. Where a dire wolf relied on its pack and a saber-tooth on its ambush, humans relied on a mixture of creativity and cooperation. And so, the fragile apes who had no fur to shield them and no fangs to fight with stepped firmly into the frozen stage of the Ice Age. They became both hunters and survivors, reshaping the balance of power in a land once ruled by beasts. But as they moved deeper into these territories, they found they were not alone. Another kind of human already walked those icy plains, shaped by a different history, built for the cold in ways that seemed almost more fitting. As humans pushed deeper into the icy frontiers, they discovered they were not alone. The frozen plains and valleys were already home to another kind of human, one whose lineage stretched back hundreds of thousands of years. These were the Neanderthals, a people as much a part of the Ice Age as the mammoth and the dire wolf. They were stocky, broad-shouldered, and built with a strength that seemed carved from stone. Their bodies adapted perfectly to the brutal cold. Where Homo sapiens looked fragile and thin, Neanderthals looked unshakable, as if the glaciers themselves had shaped them to endure. For a long time, they had ruled the cold lands of Europe and Western Asia. Their bones tell us that they were powerful, often bearing the marks of close encounters with the animals they hunted. Many carried healed injuries, proof not only of their dangerous lives, but also of their communities, for someone cared for them as they recovered. Their faces were different from ours, with heavy brows and broader noses that may have helped warm the icy air they breathed. Their hands were thick and strong, suited to shaping stone into tools or hauling the heavy hides of prey. When modern humans entered these lands, the meeting of the two species was both a moment of kinship and a moment of tension. They were not so different. Both stood upright, both used tools, both made fire, both cared for their young. Yet small differences would decide the fate of one and the survival of the other. Archaeological sites reveal fascinating evidence of their encounters. In some caves, the layers of stone tools shift from Neanderthal styles to those of Homo sapiens, suggesting that one replaced the other over time. In other places, the tools are mixed, hinting at exchange, perhaps even cooperation. It seems likely that knowledge passed between them, whether through trade, imitation, or shared hunts. And then there is the genetic evidence, the quiet story carried within our own DNA. Today, almost every person of non-African descent carries a small portion of Neanderthal ancestry, a few percent passed down through countless generations. This is proof that they did not only meet, but that they mingled, forming families together before their kind vanished. The picture is not only one of harmony, however. The world of the Ice Age was too harsh for peace to last forever. Competition for resources must have been fierce. Herds of bison and mammoth could feed one group, but rarely both. A valley rich in game, or a cave that offered shelter, might have sparked tension. There is evidence of trauma on some Neanderthal bones that may point to violent encounters, wounds inflicted not by animals, but by other humans. Whether these clashes were rare or common, we may never know, but the possibility hangs over the story like a shadow. Why then did Neanderthals disappear while Homo sapiens spread across the world? The answer is layered and complex. Part of it lies in numbers. Modern humans may have traveled in larger groups, building wider networks of kinship and exchange. Ideas, tools, and survival strategies spread more quickly, giving them an edge in a changing environment. Another part lies in adaptability. Neanderthals excelled in the cold, but when climates shifted rapidly, they may have struggled to change as fast. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, were flexible, adapting diets, tools, and strategies to new conditions. There may also have been a difference in imagination. Neanderthals made art, but rarely, and in simpler forms. Humans filled caves with paintings of animals, carved figurines from bone and ivory, and strung beads as ornaments. These acts were not simply decoration, they were symbols, shared stories that bound communities together. A group united not only by blood, but by shared belief could hold stronger ties, endure greater trials, and pass knowledge forward more easily. And so, over thousands of years, the Neanderthals dwindled. Their last strongholds lay in places like Gibraltar, where small groups held on until the world around them changed for good. When they finally vanished, they did not disappear completely. They live on, hidden in the DNA of the very humans who once walked beside them. In every breath we take, in every glance at the frozen landscapes of the past, there is a trace of Neanderthal still within us. The clash of these two titans of humanity was not only a struggle of strength, but of resilience, imagination, and connection. As Homo sapiens pressed forward, their paths led ever deeper into the Ice Age world. They became hunters of giants, learning to stand against creatures far larger than themselves, creatures whose power could both sustain them and destroy them. As Homo sapiens spread deeper into the frozen landscapes, the herds of giants that roamed the plains were both a promise of life and a shadow of danger. For a small band of hunters, to see mammoths in the distance was to see days, perhaps weeks, of food, warmth, and survival. Their hides could be stitched into clothing, their bones carved into shelters, and their fat burned for light and heat. Yet to bring one down was to risk everything, for these were not timid animals. A single charge from an enraged mammoth could scatter hunters like leaves in the wind. Bison, too, were formidable. Though smaller than mammoths, they were still massive, armored with thick hides and armed with horns that could gore a hunter in an instant. They moved in herds, their thunderous hooves shaking the ground as they migrated across the steppes. To face them required not only courage, but also a level of strategy that no other predator possessed. Humans could not rely on brute force or speed. Their strength lay in numbers, in planning, and in tools shaped by imagination. The earliest hunts were likely cautious, aimed at the weakest animals, the very young, the very old, or the injured who lagged behind the herd. Yet as knowledge grew, so too did ambition. Hunters learned to use the landscape itself as a weapon. A cliffside could become a deadly trap. With fire, shouts, and coordinated movements, groups of humans could drive an entire herd toward the edge, where panic and momentum would do the work that spears could not. Some of these kill sites have been uncovered by archaeologists, littered with bones of bison and mammoths, silent witnesses to the power of human cooperation. Spears were central to this new way of life. At first, they were simple, sharpened sticks, hardened in fire. Later, stone tips were added, crafted with precision to slice through thick skin. The atlatl, a spear-throwing device, extended the reach of the human arm, turning a short cast into a deadly strike from many yards away. With every innovation, the odds shifted slightly in humanity's favor. A single spear might not kill a giant, but a rain of them, hurled in unison, could weaken even the strongest beast. Coordination was everything. One group might circle wide to push the herd in a chosen direction, while others lay hidden, ready to strike. Signals were given with shouts, hand gestures, or perhaps even the flicker of fire in the dark. Each hunter had a role, and trust in one another was the only way to succeed. In the frozen silence of the plains, the sudden eruption of a hunt must have been a storm of noise and motion. Mammoths trumpeting in alarm, bison scattering in confusion, and the relentless drive of humans pushing forward against creatures many times their size. For the hunters, success meant survival. A single mammoth could feed an entire community, its hide stretched into shelter walls, its bones carved into tools, its sinews twisted into cord. Every part of the animal had value, nothing wasted, each life taken transformed into many lives preserved. But there was a price to this success, one that unfolded slowly and almost invisibly. The Ice Age was already a fragile world, its ecosystems balanced on scarcity. Large animals like mammoths and bison reproduced slowly. A lost calf was not easily replaced. When humans learned not only to hunt them, but to do so with increasing skill, the balance began to shift. What had once been the occasional taking of the weak grew into more organized hunts, and each kill site represented more than survival. It was a turning point where ingenuity became both the greatest strength and the greatest danger. Archaeological records suggest that in some regions, human hunting pressure grew intense. The very traits that made humans remarkable cooperation, innovation, persistence also carried within them the seeds of overuse. The line between survival and extinction was as thin as the edge of a spear. For the hunters themselves, this was not visible. Each hunt was a victory against hunger and cold, a moment of triumph in a world that gave so little. Yet over generations, the weight of those victories began to take a toll on the very creatures that had sustained them. The story of the hunt for giants is one of bravery, ingenuity, and desperate necessity. It is also a story of how fragile the balance of life can be, and how easily it can tip when survival demands more than the land can afford to give. The hunters of the Ice Age did not know they were reshaping the destiny of entire species. They knew only the cold, the hunger, and the need to feed their people, and as the hunters raised their spears against the giants, another force flickered in the dark, one that would grow into the defining power of humanity. Fire, no longer just for warmth, became a tool of control, a weapon in the hunt, and a light that bound communities together in the shadows of the frozen world. In the frozen expanse of the Ice Age, the hunt for giants gave humans food, hides, and bones, yet survival required more than bravery and tools. Against the long winters and the endless winds, there was one force that transformed fragile humans into creatures capable of standing against the cold. That force was fire. Imagine the night stretching across the tundra. The stars glittered above like shards of ice, the air so sharp that every breath seemed to burn the lungs. Around the edges of the camp, the darkness pressed in, alive with the threat of wolves or saber-tooths. Yet within the circle of firelight, there was safety. The flames danced, crackling softly, their warmth pushing back the chill that gnawed at bare skin. For early humans, this was more than comfort. It was a shield against extinction. The warmth of fire allowed people to push into lands they could never have survived without it. Wrapped in hides and gathered close, they sat by the flames as snow drifted around them. Fire dried their clothing after a storm, thawed frozen fingers, and allowed them to endure nights that would otherwise have been fatal. Children, the most vulnerable in a world of cold, could be kept alive beside the embers. In this way, the discovery and control of fire reshaped what was possible, opening the frozen stage to a species that seemed unsuited to it. But fire gave more than heat. It gave food a new form. Raw meat, torn fresh from the hunt, carried parasites and demanded effort from the body to digest. Placed over the flames, it softened, its fibers breaking down, releasing more energy with each bite. What had once been difficult to chew became nourishing. Even plants, roots, and seeds became easier to eat when roasted. This unlocking of nutrition meant more energy for long hunts, more strength to endure hunger, and more time for communities to thrive. The calories gained from cooked food fueled the brain as well, perhaps giving rise to sharper planning and deeper imagination. Around the flames, humans did not just eat, they grew. The fire also carried power beyond the body. To predators, the flicker of flame was an unfamiliar and threatening sight. Wolves and lions that might approach in the night paused before the glowing ring. The scent of smoke, the sudden heat, the snapping sparks all acted as warnings. In this way, fire was a sword that could strike without being wielded, a constant barrier against creatures waiting in the shadows. For humans without claws or fangs, it was a gift of dominance, making them masters of a space where otherwise they would have been prey. Fire shaped the rhythm of life in ways that no other tool could. The day no longer ended with the sunset. By firelight, tasks continued. Hides were scraped and stitched into clothing. Spears were sharpened, stone blades reshaped, and plans whispered for the next hunt. Around the flames, language found a home. Stories, myths, and warnings passed from elder to child, weaving together knowledge across generations. Each spark carried more than warmth, it carried memory. The fire became the heart of the community, a place where survival was shared. At night, when the wind howled outside the camp, the fire burned on. Children slept pressed against their mothers, warriors rested from the day's hunt, and elders spoke softly into the glow. The crackle of wood and the dance of sparks gave rhythm to silence, a reminder that humanity had found a way to turn the harshest element into its greatest protector. The fire was alive, but unlike the wild forces of ice and storm, it could be tamed, tended, and carried from place to place. In glowing embers held within bundles of bark or stone, humans carried the very thing that allowed them to stretch across the frozen world. To watch the flames rise was to feel power where once there had been only vulnerability. It was to look into the darkness and know that the night no longer belonged only to the predators. It was to see possibility in a place where death had seemed certain. Fire was not only warmth, it was transformation, turning fragile creatures into beings capable of enduring the most merciless age of cold. And yet, even fire could not change the skies above, where the climate shifted suddenly and without warning, bringing whiplash changes to the frozen earth that tested every living thing in its path. Even with fire in their hands and communities gathered close for protection, humans and animals alike were still at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. The Ice Age was not a single long winter, steady and predictable. It was a time of constant shifts, of sudden violent swings in temperature that could transform a landscape within the span of a generation. These changes were not gentle, and they did not unfold slowly enough for life to adapt without struggle. They came like a whip cracking across the world, leaving chaos in their wake. From the evidence preserved in the ice of Greenland and Antarctica, we now know that temperatures in some regions could rise or fall by 10 or even 15 degrees within just a few decades. For people living without houses of stone or reliable food storage, such swings meant that a stable hunting ground could vanish within the memory of a single lifetime. Imagine a valley where rivers ran strong and grasses fed herds of bison, turning suddenly dry, the prey scattering to distant lands. Or picture a stretch of tundra where humans had built shelters from mammoth bones, buried overnight under new, advancing glaciers that clawed southward once again. One of the most striking examples of this chaos is known as the Younger Dryas. Around 12,800 years ago, the world was slowly emerging from the grip of ice. Glaciers had begun to retreat, plants and animals were returning to lands long frozen, and humans had started to settle into new rhythms. Then, almost without warning, the climate snapped back. The world plunged once more into glacial cold, winters stretched long, summers shortened, and the gains of centuries were undone. This bitter return lasted for more than 1,000 years, a reminder that the Ice Age was never finished until it truly ended. For those living through it, the Younger Dryas must have been terrifying. Hunters who had grown used to slightly warmer lands suddenly found themselves in harsher conditions again. Prey animals moved unpredictably, chasing whatever patches of food they could find. Plants withered, rivers froze longer, and the fragile balance of survival tilted sharply once more. Archaeological records hint at shifting patterns of migration as groups of humans abandoned one region for another, drawn by the promise of resources or driven by desperation. Each movement carried risks, for it meant crossing territories claimed by other people or stepping into lands stalked by predators. The ice itself holds the record of this instability. Deep cores drilled from glaciers reveal layers like the pages of a book. Within them are trapped tiny bubbles of ancient air, particles of dust, and traces of past climates. These records show sudden jumps and drops in temperature, jagged lines that trace the heartbeat of a world in turmoil. They tell us that the Ice Age was not simply cold, but unstable, a world where the rules shifted constantly, demanding adaptation from every creature that hoped to endure. For the mammoths and bison, these shifts meant that feeding grounds appeared and disappeared almost overnight. For predators like saber-tooths and dire wolves, it meant that prey was less reliable, herds scattering into fragmented groups that were harder to hunt. For humans, it meant an endless test of resilience. They were forced to become wanderers, innovators, and storytellers, carrying knowledge of the land's changes across generations so that those who came after could learn where to go when the climate shifted again. The brutal climate whiplash of the Ice Age shaped not only survival but imagination. To live in a world where the ground itself seemed uncertain must have created deep anxieties. Around the fire, stories of change and loss were told, warnings wrapped in myth so that the next generation would remember. Perhaps it was in these centuries of instability that humans learned the importance of foresight, of preparing for what might come rather than trusting in what had always been. And even as the earth swung between extremes, sometimes warming, sometimes freezing, the sky above held mysteries that added yet another layer of uncertainty. For in the quiet of the night, long after the hunts were done and the fires burned low, strange signs appeared in the heavens. Some believe that one of those signs may have come crashing down to Earth itself, bringing destruction from beyond the stars. The Ice Age tested life with cold, hunger, and violent swings in climate, yet the sky itself may have added another trial. Imagine the vastness of the night above those frozen plains, stars scattered like frost across black velvet. For people huddled around their fires, the heavens were both a comfort and a mystery. But hidden among those glittering lights were wanderers, icy bodies that drifted silently through space. Some scientists believe that one of those wanderers may have fallen to Earth, bringing devastation to a world already balanced on the edge of survival. This idea is known as the comet theory. Around 12,800 years ago, just as the world seemed to be softening, when glaciers had begun to retreat and plants were creeping back into lands once buried beneath ice, something dramatic occurred. Temperatures plummeted again, the climate snapped back into a glacial state, and the fragile progress of life was suddenly reversed. This return to bitter cold is called the Younger Dryas, and while many explanations have been offered for its cause, one of the most striking is that a comet may have struck the Earth. Supporters of this theory point to a strange layer of soil found in archaeological sites across several continents. Within this layer are signs that something extraordinary happened. Blackened mats of soil, rich in carbon, suggest massive wildfires may have swept across the land. Tiny particles of glassy rock, called microtectites, appear to have been formed under extreme heat, the kind produced not by ordinary fire, but by something far more violent. There are even traces of rare minerals and nanodiamonds, materials that can be created by the immense energy of a cosmic impact. To imagine such an event is to picture fire raining from the sky. A comet, striking the atmosphere at incredible speed, would have unleashed energy greater than the largest volcanoes. Forests and grasslands might have ignited almost instantly, smoke rising to darken the skies. Animals caught in the open would have had no escape, while human communities huddled around their fires would have seen the heavens themselves become a source of terror. The sudden cooling that followed may have been caused by dust and debris blocking sunlight, plunging the warming earth back into icy conditions. For the mammoths, bison, and saber-tooths, such chaos would have been devastating. Already pressured by the shifting climate and human hunting, they now faced burning landscapes and dwindling food. For humans, it meant yet another trial in an age already heavy with hardship. Imagine a group of hunters who had just begun to find stability, watching as the land they depended on turned black with ash. The rivers may have still flowed, but the plains were scarred, the herds scattered, and the air filled with smoke. The very ground beneath their feet held the mark of catastrophe. The comet theory is not without controversy. Some scientists argue that the evidence could be explained by natural fires or volcanic eruptions, that the nanodiamonds and strange minerals might have other sources. Others insist the distribution of the black soil layers is too widespread, too sudden, to be explained by anything less than a cosmic impact. Whether it was truly a comet or some other force, what is certain is that the Earth underwent a dramatic shift at that moment, one that nearly ended the survival of life as it was beginning to recover. What makes the story haunting is not only the science, but the thought of what it must have been like for those who lived through it. To sit beside a fire, listening to the wind sweep across the tundra, and to suddenly see streaks of light tearing across the sky. To wake to a land changed overnight, where familiar hunting grounds were burned and prey animals were gone. To feel once more the weight of hunger, as if the earth itself had turned against them. And yet, just as life had endured ice and predators, it endured this as well. The comet theory may remain debated, but the scars in the soil whisper that the sky itself once tried to end the story of the Ice Age. Even so, the survivors pressed on, following the herds that remained, adapting once more to a world rewritten. Among those herds were creatures that proved astonishingly resilient, animals that would not only endure the chaos of fire and frost, but that would come to symbolize persistence in the harshest of conditions. After fire may have fallen from the skies, and the cold returned with brutal force, many of the giants of the Ice Age staggered under the weight of change. Mammoths that once marched like moving fortresses began to dwindle, their herds shrinking as the balance of food, climate, and hunting pressure tipped against them. Yet among the chaos and loss, another great beast held firm, its presence a steady heartbeat across the frozen plains. This was the bison, a creature whose endurance would carry it through fire, frost, and famine long after others had vanished. Picture the steppe of the late Ice Age. The horizon stretches wide and endless, a sea of frost-bitten grasses bending beneath the wind. Out of the white silence comes thunder. It begins low, a distant rumble, then swells into a rolling storm of sound. Hooves pound the earth, snow rises in clouds, and the ground shakes beneath the weight of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of bison moving as one. These herds were among the most vital arteries of life in the Ice Age, feeding not only predators, but also humans who had learned to track and follow them. Bison were smaller than mammoths, yet they carried a power of their own. Their shoulders were humped with dense muscle, their skulls heavy, their horns curved and sharp. A charging bison was no less dangerous than a mammoth defending its young, and many hunters bore the scars of encounters gone wrong. Still, their abundance made them irresistible. For saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and early humans alike, the bison was both a prize and a test. the measure of skill and coordination. What made the bison so enduring was not only its strength, but its flexibility. Where mammoths needed vast amounts of specific vegetation, bison could graze on a wider variety of grasses and shrubs. Their diet was less demanding, their bellies more forgiving of the tough plants that clung to survival in frozen soils. When the land changed suddenly, as it often did, the bison adapted, shifting to whatever food was available. This versatility became their shield in a world where rigidity meant extinction. Equally important was their movement. Bison did not remain tied to one place. They roamed in sweeping migrations, traveling long distances in search of grazing grounds. If one valley withered in drought or froze under sudden snowfall, the herd simply pressed onward, crossing rivers, climbing ridges, and following instinct into lands where food might still be found. Unlike mammoths, which often moved in slower, more deliberate routes, bison flowed across the landscape like rivers of muscle and bone, carrying their survival with them. For humans, the bison became a lifeline. They learned the rhythms of its migration, predicting when herds would arrive in a valley or cross a river. Hunting strategies grew around this knowledge. Spears were cast into the flanks of charging animals, while groups worked together to drive bison into traps or over cliffs where escape was impossible. The bones of these kill sites, scattered across Ice Age plains, speak to the scale of these hunts. Yet despite the pressure, the bison endured. Their numbers were vast, their ability to reproduce steady, and their mobility made them difficult to overhunt completely in a single region. The bison also carried resilience in their very design. Their thick coats shielded them against blizzards, their stocky bodies conserved heat, and their powerful lungs allowed them to endure thin, icy air at higher altitudes. Calves were born in spring when grasses returned, giving the young the best chance of survival. The cycle repeated itself year after year, even as the climate swung like a pendulum and predators circled constantly. While mammoths fell into decline, the bison marched on. Their endurance was not invincibility, but adaptability. They did not resist change by standing still, but by bending, shifting, and flowing around it. In a world where the ground itself seemed unstable, they embodied the secret of survival, flexibility. To the predators that stalked them, the bison was food. To the humans who followed them, the bison was life. And to the Ice Age itself, the bison was proof that survival did not always belong to the largest or the most powerful. It belonged to those who could adjust, who could move with the winds of change and find sustenance in even the harshest lands. As the herds moved across the frozen plains, they carried more than their own future. They carried with them the survival of entire ecosystems, feeding wolves, feeding humans, and feeding the continuity of life itself. And as the thunder of their hooves faded into the distance, other creatures followed in their wake, smaller but no less enduring, each shaped by the same unforgiving winds that tested the giants. While the bison thundered across the plains in vast herds, there were other creatures that carved out their survival in quieter, more enduring ways. They did not rely on sheer numbers alone, nor on the bulk of mammoths or the speed of horses. Their strength came from endurance, from the ability to withstand the very heart of the Arctic winds. Among the most remarkable of these survivors were the musk ox and the reindeer, animals that still walk with us today, living remnants of the Ice Age world. The musk ox is a creature that looks as if it stepped straight out of the frozen past. Stocky and broad, with curved horns and a frame built low to the ground, it carries with it a coat unlike almost any other. Beneath its long outer guard hairs lies a dense underlayer of wool called chivute, one of the warmest natural fibers on Earth. Each strand of chivute is finer than cashmere and yet traps heat with astonishing efficiency. This underlayer is so well adapted that a musk ox can face Arctic temperatures that dip far below -40 degrees and still endure. For predators, to bring down such an animal was no simple task. Its thick fur made bites less effective, and its stocky build gave it power to form defensive circles, horns pointed outward, ready to repel attackers. The reindeer, known in some parts of the world as caribou, tells another story of survival. Unlike the heavy musk ox, reindeer are lighter and far more mobile, built for long migrations across endless tundra. Every year, herds travel hundreds of miles, following the cycle of the seasons and the return of food. Their hooves are specially designed for these journeys. In summer, when the ground is soft and wet, the hooves spread wide to support their steps. In winter, the pads shrink and harden, turning into sharp edges that cut into ice and snow, allowing them to dig for the lichens that lie buried beneath. This constant motion, this ability to move across shifting landscapes, kept reindeer alive in times when staying still meant death. Both animals carry with them metabolisms tuned for survival and scarcity. The musk ox can conserve energy by slowing its activity during the harshest storms, grazing only when the wind eases, relying on fat reserves and the warmth of its herd. Reindeer, by contrast, survive through movement, their bodies burning energy efficiently as they travel, their blood circulating warmth even to their extremities. These strategies, different yet equally effective, reveal two paths through the same trial: endurance by stillness and endurance by motion. For humans living in the Ice Age, these animals were more than distant figures on the horizon. They were lifelines. Musk ox hides provided thick insulation, stronger than most other furs. Their meat was rich and sustaining, and their horns and bones could be shaped into tools. Reindeer, with their great herds and predictable migrations, became central to survival. Their hides were lighter yet warm, their sinews could be twisted into cords, and their antlers carved into points and tools. The knowledge of their patterns meant that early humans could wait for the herds to arrive, timing their hunts with the rhythm of the seasons. What is extraordinary is that both the musk ox and the reindeer survived when so many giants did not. The mammoth and the saber-tooth vanished, yet these animals endured, carrying their strategies forward into the present day. To walk the tundra of the Arctic today is to step into their story. Musk oxen still gather in defensive rings when threatened, just as they did thousands of years ago. Reindeer still move in vast migrations, hooves drumming against the earth in echoes of an ancient age. Their presence is a living link to the Ice Age, proof that survival is not only about size or ferocity, but about adaptation, endurance, and the quiet mastery of harsh environments. The frozen world of the Ice Age was filled with trials, yet creatures like the musk, ox, and reindeer remind us that resilience comes in many forms. While giants fell, these animals bent with the wind, carrying their legacy into the landscapes we still see today. And above them, circling in the pale skies of that frozen age, were the birds, some massive and fierce, who too played their part in the balance of life across the tundra. While musk oxen stood their ground against the Arctic winds, and reindeer carried their survival across endless migrations, another group of survivors watched from above. The skies of the Ice Age were alive with wings, vast and patient, casting shadows across the frozen plains. These were the birds, creatures that endured the same brutal cold as the giants below, yet carried within them a remarkable secret of survival: the ability to move with the seasons, to follow the changing world across impossible distances. Imagine standing on a tundra plain, the horizon flat and white, when a sudden shadow sweeps across the snow. Above, wings spread wider than a human is tall. A giant vulture circles, its sharp eyes scanning the herds below. Somewhere in the distance, a mammoth has fallen, or a bison lies wounded, and the bird is waiting, patient as stone, for its chance to descend. These vultures, much larger than most alive today, were nature's scavengers, sweeping across vast territories in search of death. In a world where survival for many was measured by the hunt, they thrived by taking what others left behind. Their wings carried them effortlessly over miles of ice and steppe, ensuring that nothing went to waste. Beside them soared eagles, predators of the air, fierce and relentless. Some were enormous by modern standards, strong enough to snatch young deer or smaller animals in their talons. Their eyes could spot prey from astonishing distances, locking onto the slightest movement in the snow. To early humans, these eagles must have seemed like spirits of the sky, striking with silence and speed. Their presence was a reminder that danger did not only creep in the shadows of the forest or prowl across the plains, it could also fall suddenly from above. For many birds, the key to survival was not size or strength, but movement. Migration became the ultimate trick. When winters grew too harsh and food disappeared beneath ice and snow, flocks lifted into the sky, vanishing toward warmer lands where insects still buzzed and plants still grew. They returned when the thaw opened rivers and grass pushed back through the soil, following a cycle as old as time itself. This rhythm allowed them to escape the full grip of the cold, carrying life across continents and returning again when the world softened. The migrations of these birds must have been breathtaking to witness. Flocks of geese rising in vast formations, their calls echoing like haunting music across the tundra, swans tracing rivers of ice as they flew south, their white wings merging with the pale sky. Small songbirds darting in waves, fragile yet determined, each carrying with it the resilience of countless generations that had learned the same path across the heavens. Even in the harshest of ages, the air above was alive with movement, reminding every creature below that life was not confined to the ground. Birds connected worlds. They carried seeds in their feathers, spreading plants from one land to another. They fed predators with their flesh and eggs, while also preying on insects and small mammals, shaping the balance of ecosystems in ways subtle yet powerful. Their wings stitched together the frozen earth and the warmer regions beyond, making the Ice Age not a prison, but a patchwork of shifting habitats that remained tied together by flight. What is remarkable is how many of these birds are still with us today. Vultures, though smaller now, still circle the skies, following the scent of death across savannas and mountains. Eagles still soar with eyes that see farther than ours can imagine, their cries echoing across valleys. Geese and swans continue their migrations, tracing the same routes across continents, their formations a living memory of the Ice Age skies. Even the smallest sparrows and warblers, fragile though they seem, continue their journeys each year, proving that endurance does not always belong to the largest, but often to the most adaptable. For the humans who lived through the Ice Age, these birds must have been both symbols and signs. Their migrations signaled the changing seasons, their presence near herds foretold where the animals had moved. Their calls carried across the tundra as familiar reminders that life was still there, even when the cold seemed endless. Around fires, perhaps stories were told of birds as messengers between the living and the sky, carriers of omens and spirits. To watch them fly was to see resilience in its purest form, a reminder that even in a world of snow, the air above was free. And as the shadows of their wings passed across the frozen ground, below them the plants waited, hidden under ice, ready to return with the brief thaws. These quiet survivors, rooted in silence, would prove just as vital to the story of endurance as the birds that soared high above. As birds circled the skies, carrying life across continents with their wings, the ground below told a quieter story. It was not as dramatic as the thunder of bison herds or the cries of predators, nor as haunting as the sweep of vultures overhead. Yet without it, none of those scenes could have existed at all. It was the story of plants, the silent survivors of the Ice Age, rooted in frost and shadow, refusing to surrender. Imagine a vast tundra plain, wind howling across its emptiness. At first glance, it appears barren, a desert of ice where nothing could grow. Yet look closer, down at the soil just beneath the snow, and you find threads of green clinging stubbornly to life. Hardy grasses push through the frozen ground, their blades toughened by centuries of cold. Mosses and lichens form carpets across rocks, holding moisture, breaking stone into soil grain by grain. These small, unassuming plants formed the base of the Ice Age world, the foundation upon which the survival of giants depended. Unlike great animals that needed constant food, plants had the patience of time. Many carried seeds capable of lying dormant for years, even decades, waiting for the rare moment when the ice loosened its grip. With the brief warmth of summer, when the snow melted back and the soil softened, those seeds stirred awake. In a matter of days, new shoots pushed upward, bursting into life while the season allowed. Their entire existence was a gamble on timing, a race to grow, flower, and scatter new seeds before the cold swept in once again. This resilience made them extraordinary. Grasses bent in the wind but did not break. Mosses hugged the earth so tightly that even the fiercest storms could not tear them away. Shrubs with tiny leaves grew low to the ground, conserving warmth and moisture, each twig a record of years of endurance. To walk across an Ice Age valley was to step into a hidden world of stubborn greenery, easily overlooked yet essential. These plants fed the herds that sustained everything else. Bison grazed on tough grasses, grinding them down with wide teeth. Reindeer pawed at the snow to reach lichens buried beneath, pulling energy from organisms that grew so slowly they seemed almost timeless. Even mammoths, colossal as they were, relied on these fragile blades and shrubs, sweeping snow aside with their tusks to uncover food. Every giant, every predator, every human who followed the herds was tied to these humble plants. Without them, the chains of survival would have collapsed. What makes their story so moving is the scale of their persistence. While glaciers advanced and retreated, while fire may have fallen from the sky, while predators fought and vanished, the plants endured quietly. They were not mighty in strength or terrifying in power. They simply adapted, bending to the cold, finding ways to survive with less. Some evolved to grow quickly during the short warmth of summer, while others grew slowly but steadily across centuries, covering rocks in thin layers of green. Their resilience was not loud, but it was absolute. For humans, these plants were just as vital as the animals they hunted. The meat of bison and reindeer carried the energy first gathered by grasses and moss. Herbs and roots dug from the ground added variety to their diets. Fibers could be twisted into cords, leaves brewed into simple medicines. Though often overshadowed by the drama of mammoths and predators, plants were woven into the survival of every creature that walked, crawled, or flew across the Ice Age landscape. And even now, many of these plants remain with us. Tundra grasses still ripple under Arctic winds, just as they did thousands of years ago. Mosses still cling to stones in frozen valleys, patient as ever. Lichens, slow and ancient, still cover rocks with their quiet patterns. They are living fossils, carrying the memory of the Ice Age into the present, reminders that survival does not always belong to the strongest or the swiftest. Sometimes it belongs to the smallest, to those who refuse to give up even when the world itself seems against them. As the ground shimmered with these hidden survivors, another realm carried its own secrets of endurance. Beneath the very ice itself, in places untouched by sunlight for thousands of years, tiny forms of life endured in silence, waiting for the thaw to wake them once more. Beneath the mosses and lichens that clung stubbornly to the frozen ground, and hidden among the grasses that bent under Arctic winds, lived survivors so small they were easy to overlook. They did not trumpet like mammoths or thunder across valleys like bison. They did not soar through the skies like vultures or eagles. Yet these tiny beings carried within their bodies a secret of survival so remarkable that even the giants could not match it. These were the insects of the Ice Age, creatures that endured the cold, not by size or strength, but by the chemistry of their blood. To live in such a world meant facing temperatures that could fall far below what most living tissues can withstand. Water within cells freezes when the cold grows too intense, and when it does, it expands, tearing delicate membranes apart. For most creatures, this is the end. But certain insects evolved a way to cheat the rules of ice. Their bodies produced special proteins, tiny molecules that acted like natural antifreeze. These antifreeze proteins bound to forming ice crystals, stopping them from growing, preventing them from piercing through cells, and destroying them from within. Instead of freezing solid, the insect's blood stayed fluid, even in temperatures that would have shattered other life. It is a strange thought that while mammoths battled hunger and predators stalked the plains, creatures smaller than a fingernail quietly endured storms that would have ended giants. Beetles huddled under rocks, springtails scurried through frozen soil, and midges waited for the brief warmth of summer. Their survival was not dramatic, yet it was astonishing. They thrived in silence, proof that in the harshest environments, the smallest adaptations could mean the difference between extinction and endurance. These insects carried resilience not only in their blood, but in their strategies of life. Many entered states of dormancy, slowing their bodies almost to stillness during the long winters. Their hearts barely beat, their breathing slowed to a whisper, and they clung to the earth like specks of dust. Then, when the sunlight returned and the snow melted, they awakened, rushing through short life cycles in the brief window of warmth. In a matter of weeks, they fed, reproduced, and scattered new generations, ensuring that even when the cold returned, their lineage would not vanish. Their diets also helped them endure. While larger animals depended on vast amounts of vegetation or meat, insects could survive on the smallest scraps. A single tuft of moss, a decaying leaf buried under snow, or even microscopic fungi offered enough sustenance to keep them alive. They needed so little, and in an age when food was scarce, needing less was a gift as valuable as tusks or claws. For humans, these insects were often invisible, yet their presence mattered. They helped break down plant matter into soil, feeding the roots of grasses and shrubs that supported the herds. Birds that survived the Ice Age relied on insects as food during migrations, catching them in swarms when the thaw arrived. Even fish in icy rivers fed on their larvae. Insects, though hidden, stitched together entire ecosystems, their tiny bodies carrying energy upward through the web of life. What is most haunting about their story is the contrast. Giants like mammoths and saber-tooths, built with power and size, eventually fell. Yet these fragile creatures, so small they could rest in the palm of a child's hand, lived on. Their antifreeze proteins, their dormancy, their ability to thrive with so little, gave them an edge that even the largest beasts could not claim. Many of their descendants are still with us today, hidden in Arctic soils or buzzing across summer tundra, reminders of an age when the smallest proved more enduring than the mighty. And beneath the very ice itself, deeper than the roots of mosses or the burrows of insects, another world of survival was unfolding. Locked within glaciers and frozen lakes, life found ways to wait in silence for thousands of years, enduring in places untouched by warmth or light. As insects clung to survival with antifreeze in their blood, another kind of life endured in places even more improbable. Not in the open plains where herds thundered, nor in the skies where birds traced migrations across continents, but locked away in silence beneath the ice itself. There, in the dark and frozen stillness, life waited. It was not life as we usually imagine it, not beasts with tusks or wings, but life so small it could not be seen without the aid of a lens. Microbes, the ancient engineers of existence, endured the ice age in dormancy, surviving tens of thousands of years, sealed beneath glaciers and frozen lakes. Picture the weight of an ice sheet miles thick, pressing down on the land with unimaginable force. Beneath it lies a world without sunlight, without warmth, and without air as we know it. Yet even here, tiny organisms persisted. Some became entombed in permafrost, locked in a frozen state where every movement of their bodies slowed to near stillness. Their cells remained intact, their fragile structures preserved by the cold. Others lingered in subglacial lakes, hidden pockets of liquid water buried beneath layers of ice, warmed only by the faint heat of the earth itself. In these secret reservoirs, microbes fed on minerals and chemical reactions, creating miniature ecosystems entirely cut off from the surface. The resilience of these microbes was astonishing. Some could survive without oxygen, relying instead on chemical pathways that extracted energy from the simplest of elements. Others produced protective proteins, much like the antifreeze in the blood of insects, to prevent ice crystals from shattering their delicate membranes. In the frozen soil, they endured for centuries, waiting for the thaw to wake them. When the ice melted and sunlight returned, they stirred to life again, multiplying rapidly, feeding the roots of plants and kickstarting the chain of survival that reached all the way to the giants of the tundra. To imagine their awakening is to picture seeds of life, hidden in the shadows, suddenly given the chance to bloom. A patch of snow melts, water seeps into the soil, and dormant microbes flicker back to activity. They break down organic matter left behind by long-dead plants, releasing nutrients into the ground. Grasses sprout, reindeer graze, wolves hunt, and humans follow the herds. All of this vast and visible drama of survival rested quietly on the unseen labor of microbes. They were the invisible foundation of the Ice Age world. For humans, these microbial communities remained unknown, yet their effects were felt in every mouthful of food and every breath of air. Without them, the tundra grasses could not have grown so quickly during the fleeting summers. Without them, rivers and lakes would have been barren, robbed of the nutrients that fed fish and aquatic life. Without them, the soil itself would have been sterile, unable to sustain the ecosystems that allowed survival to continue. Microbes were not only survivors in their own right, they were the hidden keepers of balance, ensuring that even in the harshest cold, the cycles of life did not collapse completely. Modern science has uncovered just how extraordinary these tiny survivors truly were. Samples of permafrost have revealed microbes that remained dormant for tens of thousands of years, only to awaken when thawed in laboratories. In Antarctica, Subglacial lakes buried under miles of ice have been found teeming with microbial life, thriving in complete darkness. These discoveries suggest that the hidden world beneath the Ice Age ice was not barren, but alive, humming quietly with endurance. It is humbling to think that while mammoths fell to extinction and saber-tooths vanished from the earth, the microbes that once fed their world continued, unchanged, beneath layers of frost. Their survival strategies were not dramatic hunts or migrations across continents. They endured by waiting, by slowing, by clinging to the most basic spark of life until conditions shifted. And as these invisible survivors shaped the ground and waters beneath the ice, they also prepared the way for the seas themselves to change. For as glaciers pressed down and then retreated, the oceans were redrawn, coastlines reshaped, and new bridges of land revealed, opening highways for both animals and humans to wander into fresh territories. Beneath the ice, microbes carried life forward in silence, but above them, another transformation was unfolding on a scale so vast it reshaped the face of the planet. The Ice Age did not only sculpt valleys and grind mountains into dust, it also rewrote the map of the oceans themselves. As glaciers thickened and spread across continents, they locked away unimaginable amounts of water, pulling the seas lower, exposing landscapes that had been hidden for ages. At the height of the Ice Age, sea levels fell by more than 400 feet. To imagine this is to picture coastlines retreating far beyond where they are today. Entire stretches of seabed, once drowned beneath waves, emerged into the light. Rocky shelves, sandy plains, and river valleys long buried under water were revealed, creating new lands for animals to roam and for humans to explore. For those who lived then, the oceans did not look like they do now. The world had wider shores, broader beaches, and continents that seemed to stretch farther into the horizon. This lowering of the seas created bridges of land that connected places once separated by water. The most famous of these was Beringia, a vast land bridge that joined Siberia to Alaska. Wide and cold, swept by winds, it became a highway for life. Herds of mammoths, bison, and musk ox wandered across it, following the grasses that spread over its surface. Wolves and saber-tooths tracked them, step by step, and behind the animals came humans, carrying fire, tools, and stories into a new world. Through Beringia, our ancestors reached the Americas, setting foot on lands no human had seen before. Other land bridges appeared as well. Britain was not an island then, but part of mainland Europe, connected by a broad plain called Doggerland. Australia was tied to New Guinea and Tasmania in a single block of land, allowing early humans to spread across it. These connections changed the flow of life. Species crossed into new territories, carrying with them both survival and competition. The oceans, once a wall, had pulled back to reveal doors. Yet while the seas gave, they also took. Their lowered waters exposed land, but they also shifted currents and climates. The circulation of oceans around the globe is like the heartbeat of the planet, carrying warmth and cold across thousands of miles. When sea levels dropped, those patterns shifted, bringing new storms, new droughts, and new uncertainties. Coastal ecosystems shrank, coral reefs were stranded, and fish populations changed as shorelines retreated. For humans who depended on the sea for food, these changes demanded new ways of living. The ocean was both barrier and savior. For those who dared to cross its waves in small boats, it was a threat, its storms unforgiving, its distances immense. Yet at the same time, it was a source of endless life. Fish teemed in icy rivers and coastal shallows, Seals and whales offered meat and fat, and seabirds gathered in flocks along the shore. For communities who learned to hunt and fish, the ocean was a lifeline, offering food when the land grew barren. Imagine a human family standing on the edge of a coast during the Ice Age. Behind them lies a world of frost, predators, and hunger. Before them stretches a sea lower than it is today, its beaches wide, its horizon distant. Across the water lies uncertainty, but also hope. Perhaps they look out and wonder what lies beyond. Perhaps they do not know that in time, their descendants will follow the herds across the land bridges or build vessels to cross the waves, filling the empty continents with life. The oceans of the Ice Age were not passive backdrops. They were forces that shaped destiny, pulling back to reveal hidden highways, rising again to flood the paths they had offered. When the ice melted at last, many of those bridges vanished forever beneath the returning seas, leaving only memory and scattered bones as proof they had ever existed. But in the frozen age, when the seas were rewritten, life seized the chance to spread. And in those cold waters that deepened and retreated with the ice, not only humans and land animals found their way to survival, marine giants endured as well, cloaked in blubber and carried by the tides, thriving in oceans that others could not endure. As the glaciers pulled oceans back and reshaped coastlines, the seas themselves became arenas of survival, filled with creatures whose endurance matched, and in some ways surpassed, that of the giants on land. For while mammoths and bison roamed the tundra, the cold waters were ruled by warm-blooded giants, wrapped in their own natural armor. Whales, seals, and their kin carried within their bodies the key to thriving in seas that would have frozen most creatures to death. Their secret was blubber, a thick layer of fat that acted as insulation, buoyancy, and reserve all at once. To imagine a whale moving through Ice Age waters is to picture grace combined with immensity. Beneath the surface of frigid oceans, their great bodies glided with ease, each stroke of their flukes carrying them across vast distances. Their blubber insulated them against freezing seas, trapping heat deep within their bodies. It also acted as energy storage, allowing them to travel long stretches without feeding when prey was scarce. In an age defined by instability, this adaptability gave whales their resilience. They migrated with the seasons, following schools of fish or swarms of krill, turning icy oceans into highways that linked poles to equator. Seals, though smaller, were no less remarkable. They split their lives between land and sea, hauling out onto ice floes to rest, give birth, and bask in pale sunlight, then diving into frigid waters to hunt. Their bodies were shaped for both worlds, streamlined for speed underwater, yet cushioned with blubber for warmth. Their whiskers sensed fish in the dark, their lungs compressed and expanded with each dive, and their movements through the water seemed effortless. To predators like polar bears, seals were prey, but to humans venturing toward the coasts, they were gifts of food, hides, and fat that could be burned as fuel. Even walruses, with their massive tusks and wrinkled skin, found their place. They dug clams from the seafloor with sensitive whiskers and tusks, gathering food from the cold mud. Their bulk, their herds, and their loud calls echoed across frozen bays, reminders that the coasts of the Ice Age were as alive as the plains inland. Each of these animals carried the same secret: blubber as armor, warm blood as shield, and the vast ocean as their realm. For early humans, these marine survivors were more than distant wonders. Along coastlines and river mouths, people discovered that the sea could feed them just as the land did. A single whale, stranded or hunted, could provide food for weeks, its blubber a source of precious calories in a world where hunger was constant. Seals offered meat rich in fat, hides for clothing and shelter, and oil for light. Even their bones could be shaped into tools. Archaeological sites near Ice Age coasts reveal piles of shells, bones of seals, and even evidence of whale use, showing that humans learned quickly to draw life from the sea. The relationship between humans and marine giants was not always one of direct hunting, at least not at first. Scavenging may have been the beginning. A whale washed ashore would have been a bounty too great to ignore, its immense body feeding an entire community. Over time, as tools sharpened and courage grew, humans learned to take to the water in small vessels, spears in hand, testing their strength against the ocean's rulers. These early efforts set the stage for the deep connection between people and the sea that would grow long after the Ice Age ended. It is striking to imagine the contrast. Inland, herds of bison and mammoths thundered across icy plains, while along the coasts, the quiet giants of the sea slipped through the water, their songs echoing beneath the waves. One world roared, the other hummed, yet both carried life forward through the same endless cold. And in both, humans found ways to endure, chasing herds across grasslands and harvesting the riches of the sea when the land grew barren. The oceans of the Ice Age were alive with possibility, their currents carrying warmth and food, their creatures adapting in ways as wondrous as any mammoth or saber-tooth. And within these seas, not only giants thrived. Rivers, fed by glaciers and streams carved by melting ice, carried with them their own lifelines, filled with fish that became vital to both animals and humans, struggling to endure the frozen age. From the vast oceans where whales and seals glided beneath walls of ice, life flowed inland through rivers, born of melting glaciers. These rivers were narrow compared to the endless seas, yet they carried with them the same promise of survival. Against the silence of the tundra, their waters shimmered and sang, winding through valleys carved by ice. And though they ran cold enough to sting bare skin, these rivers were not empty. They teemed with fish, proof that even in a world gripped by frost, movement and life could endure. Among the most remarkable of these survivors were salmon and trout. They were shaped by the very currents of the Ice Age, their lives tied to the rhythm of rivers that surged and froze with the seasons. To watch them in those waters was to witness resilience. Sleek bodies darted against the flow, muscles coiled with strength, each scale glinting like silver in the pale light. In winter, when the rivers slowed under sheets of ice, they lingered in deep pools, conserving energy, waiting for the thaw. In summer, when meltwaters surged, they leapt upstream, determined to spawn and continue a cycle older than memory. The adaptability of these fish was astonishing. Salmon, for instance, were able to thrive in both freshwater and saltwater, journeying from icy rivers into the open sea and back again to reproduce. This dual existence allowed them to find food in the vastness of the ocean while keeping their life cycle rooted in rivers that cut through the Ice Age landscape. Trout, too, showed a range of flexibility. Some lived their entire lives in freshwater streams, while others ventured into larger bodies of water before returning home. Their capacity to endure shifting temperatures and changing flows made them perfect companions to a world in constant flux. For humans, these fish were a lifeline. Hunting mammoths or bison demanded risk, courage, and often cooperation on a scale that could end in injury or failure. But a river filled with salmon in the spawning season offered food in abundance. Nets woven from plant fibers, spears tipped with bone, or even traps built from stone gave early humans a chance to harvest protein and fat without chasing giants across dangerous plains. Smoke from campfires often carried the scent of fish hung over the flames to dry. a way of storing nourishment for the long months when hunting might bring little. Animals, too, turned to the rivers for survival. Bears, emerging hungry from hibernation, snapped at leaping salmon, their claws slicing through the icy spray. Birds gathered along banks, swooping down to snatch small fish from shallow waters. Even wolves and foxes scavenged along the edges, feeding on what the current left behind. The rivers became places where life converged, predators and prey alike drawn to the shimmering abundance that pulsed through the cold. The presence of fish in frozen waters carried with it a kind of reassurance. For people who lived under constant threat of scarcity, rivers were signs of hope. No matter how deep the snow or how long the winter, the waters would thaw, and with them would come food. The fish became symbols of cycles, of renewal, of life returning year after year despite the cold's unyielding grip. In their migrations, humans may have seen lessons, reminders that survival depended not only on strength, but also on persistence, on knowing when to wait and when to move. To imagine standing beside an ice age river is to hear the groan of glaciers in the distance, the whistle of wind across the plains, and then, beneath it all, the steady rush of water. Beneath that surface, salmon and trout swam against impossible odds, carrying forward a lineage that would outlast giants. Their resilience was quiet, yet it sustained both ecosystems and people. And as rivers carved valleys through stone and ice, humans left their own mark upon them. In caves lit by firelight, deep beyond the reach of the wind, they painted not only mammoths and lions, but also fish, their shapes etched alongside stories of survival. These images remind us that the rivers were not forgotten, that the quiet lifelines of water were as vital to the Ice Age world as the thundering herds. Beyond the rivers and the fish they carried, another kind of survival unfolded in the minds of humans themselves. With firelight on cave walls, they began to transform experience into memory, shaping belief, and giving survival not just form, but meaning. Beside frozen rivers, where salmon leapt against the current and trout shimmered in icy pools, humans gathered around firelight not only to cook and eat, but also to dream. The hunts of the day and the struggles of the season did not stay in silence. They became stories, images, and symbols carved into the very walls of the world. Deep inside caves, where the wind could not reach and shadows stretched long, people left behind one of the most haunting legacies of the Ice Age, paintings of the life around them glowing in the flicker of flame. Imagine stepping into a cavern tens of thousands of years ago. The floor is uneven, cold stone pressing against bare feet. The air is thick with the scent of smoke, the sound of crackling fire echoing against walls that drip with moisture. Then your eyes adjust, and you see them. Mammoths with curved tusks stride across the rock. Bison bow their heads, their broad shoulders painted in strokes of red and black. Lions creep low to the ground, their forms alive in the shifting light. Horses gallop, frozen mid-stride, their shapes layered one atop another as if capturing movement itself. It is not silence here. The walls speak. These were not idle decorations. They were acts of meaning. Each stroke of ochre or charcoal carried weight, a connection between survival and story. When hunters painted mammoths, perhaps it was not only to remember them, but to call them back, to summon luck for the next hunt. When lions were drawn, it may have been both fear and respect, an acknowledgement of predators that shared the same world. The caves became places where survival was given form larger than life, where reality turned into myth. For early humans, tools shaped their bodies' chances, but imagination shaped their spirit. Belief was as vital as fire. To live in a world where every dawn brought the possibility of hunger or death required more than spears and shelters. It required purpose. Around the flicker of flames, with shadows dancing over painted walls, humans found something that gave them strength beyond the physical. They found meaning in the patterns of animals, in the cycles of life and death, and in the act of creating something that could outlast them. The caves themselves tell us that this spirit of survival was widespread. From Lascaux in France to Altamira in Spain, from Chauvet with its lions and rhinoceroses to smaller hidden sites across Europe, humans filled the dark with visions. Their hands left prints on walls, as if to say, I was here and I endured. They mixed pigments from minerals, ground stone into powders, blended them with fat or spit, and carried them deep into caverns lit only by torches. The effort was immense, and yet they did it again and again. It is easy to imagine the scene, children watching in awe as elders painted, learning not only about animals but about reverence. The flicker of flame may have made the images move, turning still creatures into living ones before their eyes. In that moment, the line between survival and storytelling blurred. They were not only recording what they saw, but shaping how they understood it. Even abstract signs appear among the animals' dots, spirals, lines perhaps carrying messages, perhaps maps of hunts, or perhaps symbols of beliefs we can no longer fully decode. Whatever their purpose, they remind us that humans did not just endure the Ice Age physically, they endured it by creating shared stories that gave structure to chaos. The spirit of survival found in these caves was passed down not only through paintings, but through songs and words. Around fires, voices rose, retelling hunts, describing encounters with predators, imagining forces larger than themselves. The caves preserved the images, but the fire preserved the stories. Together, they wove a fabric of culture that bound communities tighter than sinew or hide. This weaving of imagination into daily struggle may have been what allowed humans to thrive where others faltered. Neanderthals had strength and tools, but Homo sapiens carried a different edge, the ability to imagine together, to see beyond the present into the possible. In painted caves, that gift is made visible. The animals still walk those walls, tens of thousands of years later, long after the real herds have vanished. And while the paintings glowed in hidden caverns, outside, humans continued to refine not only their stories, but their shelters. In valleys swept by wind and on plains where the cold bit deepest, they learned to craft homes that would shield them from the Ice Age itself. The flicker of firelight on cave walls carried meaning and imagination, yet survival demanded more than symbols. Outside those caverns, the winds howled with blades of ice, snow drifted in endless blankets, and temperatures fell low enough to steal the breath from human lungs. To endure in such a world, people needed more than stories. They needed walls, roofs, and structures strong enough to shield them from the fury of the Ice Age. And so, with ingenuity as sharp as their tools, they began to build. Some of the most striking examples of Ice Age shelters were created not from wood or stone, which were scarce on the treeless steppes, but from the remains of giants. Archaeologists have uncovered circles of mammoth bones arranged like the foundations of houses, their heavy frames once supporting roofs of hide and branches. Imagine walking into one of these huts thousands of years ago. The curved ribs of a mammoth rose like beams, tusks were set as posts, and hides stitched together by sinew stretched across the frame, blocking out the wind. Inside, fires burned at the center, smoke curling through small gaps, while families huddled around the warmth. The bones of the very animals they hunted became the skeletons of their homes, turning death into shelter and survival into a feat of engineering. Hide tents offered another answer to the cold. Built from the skins of reindeer, bison, or other large animals. These shelters were lighter and more portable than bone huts. Hunters and their families could strike camp, move with the herds, and set up again wherever food carried them. The hides were stretched over wooden poles, sometimes anchored with stones, and insulated with furs to trap heat. Inside, layered bedding of moss and animal skin softened the frozen ground, creating spaces where children could sleep and elders could rest. The tents turned barren tundra into temporary homes, proof that even in a land stripped bare by ice, humans could invent comfort. Deep caves, too, became refuges. Some caves were decorated with paintings, while others were chosen simply for their protection from the storm. The rock walls held steady against winds that could flatten skin tents, and the earth itself offered insulation. Fires burned at entrances to keep predators away, while the deeper chambers became storage for meat, tools, and supplies. Archaeological digs have revealed hearths blackened with soot, bones scattered from meals, and tools left where hands once worked by firelight. These caves were more than shelters. They were sanctuaries where communities gathered, where lives unfolded against the rhythm of the Ice Age. What is remarkable about these shelters is the complexity they reveal. Archaeologists studying mammoth bone huts have found evidence of organized planning, bones arranged carefully to form walls, tusks positioned to support roofs, and even signs of insulation with grass and soil. Some huts were large enough to house entire families, with separate hearths suggesting that more than one fire burned inside. These were not haphazard constructions. They were deliberate, crafted with skill, and adapted to the harshest conditions Earth has ever known. The ingenuity extended to how these shelters were used. Meat could be stored outside, frozen solid by the winter air, while hides were cured and bones shaped into tools within the warmth of the dwelling. The hearths provided not only heat, but light for repairing weapons, preparing food, and even storytelling. Children grew up within these walls of bone and hide, their earliest memories shaped by the hum of fire and the murmur of voices speaking softly against the storm outside. To imagine life inside such a shelter is to picture resilience embodied, a family huddled together while icy winds clawed at the walls. The glow of fire casting orange light on mammoth bones, transforming death into structure. The scent of cooked meat, mingling with smoke. The world outside was unforgiving, yet inside there was warmth, community, and the fragile sense of safety. These homes show us that survival was not only about facing the cold, but mastering it through creativity. Humans learned to transform the resources at hand into shields against extinction. They stitched hides with bone needles, set fires at the center of their dwellings, and built places where not only the body, but also the spirit could rest. And from these shelters, warmed and protected, new sparks of invention continued to grow. The same hands that stitched hides and stacked bones would soon create tools and clothing so advanced that they became as vital as the walls themselves. The next step in survival was not only to build homes, but to craft innovations that would carry humans farther than the Ice Age winds ever could. Inside the shelters of bone and hide, where firelight glowed and winds clawed uselessly at the walls, humans discovered that endurance was not enough. To survive the Ice Age, they needed to adapt, to invent, to turn necessity into creativity. It was here, in the crucible of hardship, that some of humanity's most remarkable innovations were born. One of the most extraordinary was clothing, not just hides draped over shoulders, but garments carefully shaped and fitted to the body, tailored for warmth and movement. Archaeologists have found bone needles, polished smooth and pierced with tiny eyes, evidence of sewing that was far more advanced than mere wrapping in skins. With these tools, Early humans could stitch animal hides together into coats, leggings, boots, and hoods. Each piece was layered and reinforced, designed to trap heat and protect against winds that could strip flesh bare. Imagine a hunter pulling on fur-lined boots, each stitch keeping the cold from seeping in. A mother wrapping her child in a snug hooded garment, every seam sealed with sinew. Tailored clothing meant survival no longer depended only on fires and shelters, but could be carried on the body itself. It allowed people to walk farther, hunt longer, and endure storms that might otherwise have killed them in minutes. In a world of endless winter, sewing was as important as fire, but necessity did not end with warmth. It pressed humans to reshape the very tools of survival. Spears became lighter, sharper, and deadlier. Stone points were flaked into fine edges, attached with sinew and resin to wooden shafts. The invention of the atlatl, a spear thrower, gave hunters the strength to hurl weapons farther and with greater force than their arms alone could manage. This meant mammoths, bison, and reindeer could be hunted with less risk, as blows could be struck from a safer distance. For smaller prey, traps and snares were crafted, using clever designs to turn the environment itself into a tool. Each innovation showed the same truth. Humans were not the fastest, the strongest, or the most heavily armed species of the Ice Age. Their advantage lay in creativity. When faced with scarcity, they found new ways to obtain food. When threatened by predators, they invented strategies to outwit them. When the cold grew unbearable, they shaped the materials around them into layers of protection. Even the smallest details of life bore the marks of invention. Scrapers carved from stone allowed hides to be cleaned and softened for clothing. Burins, sharp chisel-like tools, carved bone and antler into needles, fishhooks, or ornaments. Awls pierced holes for stitching. The toolkit of Ice Age humans was vast and growing, proof that every challenge became an opportunity to refine and improve. This creativity was not only practical, but cultural. Tools carried with them knowledge, passed from generation to generation. A child who watched an elder flake stone into a spear point was learning not only technique, but the patience, focus, and vision required to imagine what did not yet exist. Innovation became a thread that tied communities together, ensuring survival through shared wisdom. For humans, these advances meant more than endurance, they meant freedom. Tailored clothing allowed people to venture deeper into frozen landscapes. Improved hunting tools made it possible to feed larger groups, supporting wider networks of families and tribes. Creativity gave humanity an edge that no thick fur or sharp fang could match. It allowed them to shape the world around them, rather than be shaped entirely by it. The marks of this ingenuity remain even now, buried in caves, scattered across plains, and preserved in frozen soil. The tools of Ice Age humans tell the story of minds that refuse to surrender. Each needle, each scraper, each flaked blade is a fragment of the same truth. Survival was not only about enduring the cold, but about imagining ways to rise above it. And while humans stitched hides and carved tools by firelight, outside their shelters the world of giants was shifting. The Ice Age pressed harder, resources grew scarce, and the great beasts that once seemed eternal began to falter, one by one, under the weight of hunger, hunting, and change. While humans stitched tailored clothing with bone needles and crafted sharper, more versatile tools, the world outside their shelters was changing in ways that could not be undone. For hundreds of thousands of years, the frozen plains had been ruled by giants, the mammoths with their spiraled tusks, the saber-tooth cats with their 6-inch fangs, and the dire wolves, with their crushing jaws and pack strategies. These creatures had seemed eternal, as much a part of the land as the glaciers themselves. Yet the Ice Age was not a static world, and survival for even the mightiest was never guaranteed. One by one, the giants began to disappear. The mammoths, those walking fortresses of hair and bone, had endured the cold by roaming in vast herds, scraping snow away to find grasses and shrubs. But as the climate shifted and warming crept into their frozen realm, their food began to dwindle. Tundra gave way to forest in many regions, replacing the open steppe with trees that mammoths were ill-suited to eat. At the same time, humans pressed harder against them. With spears, traps, and cooperation, humans learned to bring down these giants, sometimes targeting entire herds. To kill a mammoth was to secure food, clothing, and shelter for many, but each hunt also chipped away at populations that were already strained by hunger. The saber-tooth cats, apex predators of the plains, suffered a different fate. Their long fangs had made them masters of ambush, built for taking down large prey, yet those very adaptations became their downfall. As the mammoths declined and other massive herbivores grew scarcer, the saber-tooths found fewer opportunities to use the strategy that had carried them for millennia. They were specialized hunters in a world that now demanded flexibility. When humans spread across their territories, competing for the same prey and armed with weapons that could kill at a distance, the saber-tooths were pushed to the margins. Their strength became a weakness, their skill a trap, until at last their reign ended in silence. The dire wolves, too, fell victim to the shifting balance. Larger than modern wolves, with heavier jaws and stronger bodies, they had thrived in packs that worked together to bring down prey many times their size. Fossils from the La Brea tar pits reveal scenes of desperate hunts and tragic ends. Whole packs lured into sticky death by the promise of struggling animals. Their reliance on megafauna like bison and young mammoths left them vulnerable when those herds began to thin. Meanwhile, their smaller and more adaptable cousins, the gray wolves, endured by turning to smaller prey, scavenging, and shifting diets. In the end, it was not always the strongest that survived, but the most flexible. These extinctions were not the work of a single cause. They were the product of a fragile balance tipped too far. Climate warming transformed landscapes, shrinking the grasslands that once supported vast herds. Humans, spreading farther and faster than ever before, became relentless hunters, not out of cruelty, but necessity, and instability itself played its part. The Ice Age was a time of sudden swings, of harsh winters followed by unexpected thaws, of ecosystems struggling to adjust. Giants that had once seemed invincible were caught in this storm of change, their numbers dwindling until the last of their kind vanished. The collapse of these ecosystems rippled outward. When mammoths fell, predators that depended on them faltered too. When saber-tooths disappeared, prey species shifted in behavior, altering the delicate web of survival. The land that had once thundered with herds and echoed with the roars of great cats grew quieter, its sounds replaced by the footsteps of humans and the calls of smaller animals that carried on. And yet, extinction was never absolute in its silence. Some mammoths clung to survival in isolated places like Wrangle Island, cut off from the rest of the world, their herds dwindling until only a few fragile groups remained. Their story, lingering long after the giants of the mainland had fallen, offers a haunting glimpse of survival stretched to its very limit, and a reminder of how close the world came to losing them entirely. As the great beasts of the Ice Age fell silent across the continents, their tusks buried in frozen soil and their bones left to scatter across plains, a few of the giants managed to escape the tide of extinction. Far to the north, in the icy reaches of the Arctic Ocean, an island rose from the waves, cut off from the rest of the world. This was Wrangle Island, a lonely refuge of tundra and stone, where small herds of woolly mammoths survived long after their kin had vanished everywhere else. To picture this island is to imagine a place both stark and beautiful. Its coasts were lashed by storms, its winters long and unforgiving. Snow blanketed the ground for much of the year, broken only by brief summers when grasses and mosses emerged in patches across the landscape. It was not an easy place to live, but it offered something precious: isolation. While mammoths across Eurasia and North America dwindled from hunting and shrinking habitats, those on Wrangle Island were spared the same pressures, shielded by the sea from advancing humans and predators. For thousands of years after the mammoths disappeared from the mainland, the island's winds still carried the sound of tusks clashing and herds moving slowly across the tundra. Yet these survivors were not the towering giants of legend. Over time, the mammoths of Wrangle Island became smaller, shrinking to almost half the size of their ancestors. This was not weakness, but adaptation. On an island with limited food and space, a smaller body was easier to sustain. Even so, their shaggy coats, curved tusks, and gentle eyes remained, reminders of the Ice Age world that had once stretched across continents. They were the last echoes of a vanished age, living ghosts of a frozen past. The story of their survival is haunting because it lasted so long, and yet not forever. For more than 4,000 years after the last mammoths on the mainland had fallen, these island herds endured. By the time they finally vanished, the pyramids of Egypt were already standing, and human civilizations had begun to write their histories in stone and clay. Somewhere far away, humans were building cities, while on this isolated island, the last of the mammoths still walked beneath northern skies. But their end was slow and inevitable. Cut off from the wider world, their population dwindled to a fragile few hundred. Inbreeding weakened their health, genetic flaws accumulated, and strange deformities appeared in their bones and tusks. The ice that had once shaped their survival receded, changing the fragile ecosystem of the island. Fresh water may have grown scarce. Plants may have failed to grow in the same abundance. For the last herds, life became a narrowing path, each generation more fragile than the one before. To imagine their final hours is to picture a small group of mammoths, perhaps clustered together on a windswept plain. Their tusks, once weapons of defense and tools of survival, now useless against the quiet march of decline. Their calves struggled to survive harsh winters. Their elders carried memories of herds that once filled entire valleys. The silence of extinction crept in, not with violence, but with loneliness. A world that had once thundered with mammoth footsteps faded into quiet, until at last the final breath of the final mammoth passed into the Arctic wind. There is something deeply human in the way this story touches us. We never lived to see these last mammoths alive, yet their closeness in time makes them feel almost within reach. They were not ancient in the sense of dinosaurs, separated by millions of years. They walked the earth when our own ancestors were already building monuments and tending fires. The thought that giants still moved across Wrangle Island as humans carved their first histories is both beautiful and unbearably sad. And while the mammoths vanished into memory, humans did not stop moving. From frozen plains to coasts, from one continent to another, people spread farther still, carrying with them tools, fire, and stories. The Ice Age, though fading, continued to shape the destiny of humanity, pressing us onward across the globe. As the last mammoths faded into silence on Wrangle Island, Another story was unfolding, one that would shape the entire future of life on Earth. While the giants struggled against extinction, humans were moving outward, step by step, across continents. The Ice Age, with its locked up oceans and vast land bridges, gave humanity an opportunity no species before had ever possessed. From the frozen plains of Europe to the far edges of the Americas, we spread until our footprints encircled the globe. Imagine a family of early humans standing on the edge of Siberia, the wind tearing at their hides, their breath curling in the frozen air. Before them stretched not an endless ocean, but a broad plain of land, cold and treeless, yet solid beneath their feet. This was Beringia, the land bridge that once connected Asia to North America. For thousands of years it lay exposed, a highway across the top of the world, created when the seas dropped hundreds of feet during the Ice Age. On this bridge, mammoths and bison wandered, wolves and lions followed, and behind them, humans carried fire, tools, and stories into a land no one had seen before. Crossing such spaces was not quick. It may have taken generations, with families moving slowly, hunting and gathering as they went. To the people themselves, it was not a grand migration, but simply survival following herds, seeking food, moving where the land allowed. Yet over time, these quiet steps became something monumental. Humans reached the Americas, filling valleys and forests, rivers and coasts, eventually spreading from the Arctic tundra to the tropical plains of South America. Europe, too, was transformed. During the Ice Age, what we now call Britain was not an island, but part of the mainland. A region known as Doggerland stretched across what is now the North Sea, a vast plain where reindeer roamed and humans hunted. Here, people built camps and followed herds across grasslands that today lie buried beneath waves. When the ice melted and the seas rose again, Doggerland disappeared, but for thousands of years it was a vital part of human expansion. Farther south, other bridges opened pathways. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania were joined into one great landmass called Sahul, connected by low sea levels. Humans reached its shores at least 40,000 years ago, crossing stretches of water in simple rafts, guided by courage and perhaps the stars. Once there, they adapted to deserts, rainforests, and coastlines, proving again that survival was not about the harshness of the environment, but about the creativity to endure it. With each new place, humans reshaped not only themselves but also the land. In icy Europe, they developed clothing and shelters to withstand endless winters. In Asia, they learned to track reindeer across the tundra and to fish rivers teeming with life. In the Americas, they faced landscapes filled with strange new animals, giant sloths, camels, and armadillo-like creatures larger than a car. Each step into a new environment demanded new tools, new strategies, and new ways of thinking. The Ice Age was not only a test of endurance, it was a forge that turned humanity into a planetary species. What makes this story remarkable is how fragile humans seemed at the start. Hairless bodies, soft skin, and no claws or fangs to defend ourselves. And yet, through fire, through cooperation, through imagination, we reached every corner of the earth. The very challenges of the Ice Age, the cold, the scarcity, the shifting seas became opportunities. Oceans pulled back to reveal stepping stones, and we took them. Winds carved the land into new paths, and we walked them. Predators stalked us, and we learned to stalk in return. By the end of the Ice Age, humans lived on every continent except Antarctica. We were no longer bound to one region, but had become wanderers across the planet, each group adapting to the place it called home. Some carried memories of mammoths on the steppe, others fished salmon in glacial rivers, while still others painted the walls of caves with lions and bison. Each story was different, yet all were woven into the same tapestry of survival. And as humans spread, the very ice that had shaped our journey also reshaped the earth itself. Glaciers carved valleys, rivers, and lakes, leaving behind landscapes that would feed civilizations long after the Ice Age ended. As humans spread across new continents, they walked upon a planet being rewritten beneath their very feet. The Ice Age did not only shape the fate of animals and people, it sculpted the land itself with a force so immense that its marks can still be seen today. Wherever the glaciers advanced, they carved, ground, and molded the earth, leaving behind a legacy that would shape rivers, valleys, and even the soils that later nourished entire civilizations. To imagine the power of these glaciers, picture a river of ice, not a few feet thick, but miles deep, pressing down with the weight of mountains. As it moved, slowly but relentlessly, it dragged with it rocks, gravel, and earth. The ice ground mountains into dust, gouged valleys from solid stone, and left behind scars that stretched across continents. What we know as the fjords of Norway, the Great Lakes of North America, or the U-shaped valleys of the Alps are all signatures of this ancient force. The glaciers were not just sheets of ice, they were sculptors, chiseling the planet on a colossal scale. Wherever the ice paused, it dropped what it carried. Vast ridges of rock and sand called moraines piled up at the edges, forming hills that remained long after the glaciers retreated. Rivers of meltwater poured from beneath the ice, spreading gravel across plains and leaving behind braided channels that still trace across landscapes today. And when the glaciers melted completely, they left behind deep depressions that filled with water, creating lakes that became lifelines for future peoples. Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, and Lake Ontario are not accidents of geology, but the remnants of Ice Age glaciers, carving and melting, sculpting basins that now hold 1/5 of the world's fresh water. Even more subtle was the soil the glaciers left behind. As they crushed rock into fine powder, they spread it across the land when the winds picked it up and carried it for hundreds of miles. This dust, called loess, created fertile blankets of soil that became the foundation for future agriculture. The rich farmlands of China's Yellow River Basin, Europe's plains, and America's Midwest all owe their fertility to the grinding jaws of the Ice Age glaciers. Without this gift of soil, the rise of farming, and with it, the rise of civilizations, might have been impossible. Glaciers also reshaped the courses of rivers. When ice blocked valleys, rivers were forced to find new paths, sometimes cutting through rock to form great canyons. The mighty Mississippi River, for example, was carved into its present course in part by Ice Age floods. Catastrophic bursts of meltwater carved landscapes in moments that would have taken rivers thousands of years to erode. These sudden floods left behind scoured plains, coulees, and boulder fields, reminders of a planet reshaped in fits of violence as well as slow grinding. For humans living at the time, these changes were not geological curiosities, but daily realities. Valleys carved by glaciers offered shelter from winds. Rivers redirected by ice became new hunting grounds. Lakes filled with fish became vital food sources. The land was both hostile and generous, shaped in ways that demanded adaptation but also offered opportunities. Every step humans took carried them across ground newly sculpted, a world in transition that they were learning to call home. The legacy of the Ice Age can still be felt whenever we look at a mountain valley, a broad plain of fertile farmland, or a freshwater lake stretching to the horizon. These landscapes remind us that the frozen world of mammoths and dire wolves did not vanish completely. It left its fingerprints in stone and soil, in rivers and lakes, in the very shape of the continents. And while the glaciers shaped the land, the lessons they pressed into humanity were just as lasting. Survival required not only adapting to the ice, but also learning from it to bend rather than break, to find abundance where little seemed to exist. Those lessons of resilience, carved into our very DNA, would echo long after the ice retreated. Beyond the land itself, the Ice Age left something even deeper, etched into the human story: the understanding that survival was not guaranteed, but achieved through cooperation, adaptability, and endurance. And as the ice gave way to warmth, the memory of those trials carried forward into the next age of human history. The glaciers carved valleys, sculpted rivers, and left behind fertile soils, but their greatest impact may not have been written in the land at all. It was written in the living things that endured their cold dominion, especially in us. The Ice Age tested every species that walked, swam, or flew across the earth. It rewarded not the largest or the fiercest, but those who could adapt, who could bend with change rather than break beneath it. In its long, frozen grip, the Ice Age taught lessons of survival that still echo inside us today. Look at the giants who once roamed. The mammoths, towering and armored in thick fur, seemed invincible, yet they faltered when their grasslands shrank. The saber-tooth cats, armed with fangs like daggers, reigned as predators until their specialized hunting left them helpless as prey vanished. Even the dire wolves, powerful in packs, could not endure when their food sources grew scarce. Their brute strength could not overcome a world that shifted faster than they could change. In contrast, creatures that were smaller, more flexible, and more resourceful endured. Reindeer adjusted their grazing, musk oxen tightened their herds, and humans reimagined their very way of living. Adaptability became the most precious tool of survival. For humans, this meant more than tailoring hides into clothing or sharpening stone into spears. It meant learning to live in deserts, forests, coasts, and tundra, reshaping diets and strategies depending on what the land offered. It meant noticing the patterns of animals, the timing of migrations, the thawing of rivers, and the return of fish. Where one environment closed its doors, another opened, and those who could walk through survived. The Ice Age was relentless, but it was also a teacher, showing that survival belonged to those who could imagine new ways to endure. Equally vital was cooperation. In the cold silence of glacial nights, no one could stand alone for long. A single hunter could not bring down a mammoth, but a coordinated group, armed with shared knowledge, could. A family could not survive the winter without the warmth of a fire, but a community could gather fuel, maintain the flames, and share the shelter. Cooperation was not simply kindness, it was a necessity woven into the fabric of survival. Around campfires, people shared food, passed on tools, and told stories that bound them together. In those bonds lay strength greater than any claw or fang. Archaeological evidence shows that even the injured or elderly were cared for. Skeletons have been found with signs of healed fractures and long-term disabilities, proof that these individuals were not abandoned but tended to by their groups. In such moments, we see the clearest mark of the Ice Age. Survival was no longer just about the individual. It was about the collective, about ensuring that knowledge, skills, and stories lived on through each member of the tribe. These lessons are still carried in us. Our bodies hold traces of Ice Age resilience in ways both visible and hidden. In our DNA, genes that helped our ancestors endure cold, hunger, and disease remain. In our cultures, the value of cooperation continues to shape how we live, from families to entire civilizations. Even now, when we face new challenges, from climate shifts to global crises, the echoes of the Ice Age remind us that adaptability and unity are stronger than size or strength alone. To picture this is to imagine a family huddled in a mammoth bone hut, the wind howling outside, firelight flickering against walls of hide. Inside, each person has a role, one tending the fire, another repairing tools, another teaching a child how to stitch clothing or shape stone. None of them could survive alone, but together they form a circle of endurance. That circle has never truly broken. It widened across continents, across time, until it became the human story itself. And as this story of resilience unfolded, it was not only written in our genes or our shelters, but also in the living creatures that walked beside us. For even as many giants fell, others endured, surviving through the same patience and adaptability that shaped us. The lessons of the Ice Age were not only etched into human memory, but into the very bodies and instincts of the animals that managed to endure its frozen grip. Though the mammoths and saber-tooth cats have vanished, some creatures remain, carrying with them strategies born in the depths of glacial winters. When we look at reindeer moving across northern snow or wolves running together through the forest, we are seeing living fragments of the Ice Age, survivors whose endurance still whispers of that ancient world. Consider the reindeer, known in some places as caribou. To see them traveling in great herds across snowy plains is to glimpse a rhythm as old as the glaciers themselves. Their hooves are wide and sharp-edged, perfectly suited for digging through snow to uncover the hidden lichens and mosses that sustain them in the coldest months. Their coats change with the seasons, thickening into dense insulation in winter and shedding into lighter layers in summer. Even their eyes adapt, shifting in color from golden in bright months to deep blue in the dim Arctic winter, allowing them to see in near darkness. This is not mere survival. It is mastery of an environment that would kill most creatures in days. Bison also carry the memory of the Ice Age in their powerful frames. Today's bison, grazing across North American plains, are smaller than their Ice Age ancestors, yet their strategies remain. With thick, shaggy coats and humps of muscle that allow them to plow through snow, they are built for endurance. In winter, they use their massive heads as living shovels, swinging side to side to uncover grasses buried beneath the frost. Herds cluster together, their sheer numbers providing safety and warmth, just as they once did when dire wolves stalked them on icy steppes. Each bison we see today is a reminder that flexibility, migration, and sheer persistence can carry a species through even the hardest ages. The musk ox is another testament to survival. With their long, flowing coats and underlayers of chivute, a wool finer and warmer than any sheep's, they are shielded from winds that sweep across the tundra with cutting force. Musk oxen form defensive circles when threatened, adults facing outward with sharp horns, while the young are protected in the middle. This strategy, honed against Ice Age predators, remains effective even now. Their endurance lies not in speed or ferocity, but in unity and resilience. To watch a herd of musk oxen bracing together against the wind is to see the very principle of survival through cooperation made visible. And then there are the wolves, whose ancestors ran with the dire wolves and shadowed the herds of the Pleistocene. Gray wolves, unlike their larger cousins that vanished, adapted by broadening their diets and strategies. They can bring down prey many times their size when hunting in coordinated packs, but they can also survive on smaller animals, fish, or even scavenged remains. Their strength lies in versatility, in the ability to adjust tactics to the land and the moment. The howl of a wolf across snowy ridges is not only a call to its pack, it is an echo of an age when predators and prey alike had to constantly shift to survive. These animals are more than relics. They are living reminders of the Ice Age's harshest lessons. Their bodies and behaviors still carry the blueprints of endurance: migrate when food runs out, adapt coats to the seasons, band together against threats, and never rely on strength alone when flexibility offers a better chance. Each reindeer hoof striking the snow, each bison plowing through frost, each musk ox bracing against the wind, and each wolf's howl rising over the tundra is a testament that the strategies forged under ice still work. And as these survivors continue their ancient rhythms, the world around them keeps shifting. The glaciers retreat, rivers swell, and seas rise. Humans, now spread across every continent, stand at the edge of a changing Earth. The end of the Ice Age would not only reshape the land, but also mark the beginning of a new chapter in life's story, one where survival gave way to flourishing as the frozen world slowly melted into warmth. The reindeer, the bison, the musk ox, and the wolves carried with them strategies that had endured for thousands of years, yet even they faced a world that was beginning to change in ways no creature could ignore. The great silence of the Ice Age, broken only by the howl of wind and the tread of herds, began to soften. The air grew warmer, the ice that had locked continents in white began to retreat, and the earth stirred with the beginnings of something new. The end of the Ice Age was not sudden. It unfolded like a slow breath, a long thaw that transformed every horizon, reshaping coasts, valleys, and the very face of the planet. Imagine standing on a plain that for generations had been buried beneath a wall of ice taller than any mountain. As the climate shifted, that towering sheet of frozen stone began to melt. At first, rivers swelled and deepened, fed by the trickle of meltwater. Then lakes grew vast and restless, their surfaces shimmering under skies that no longer bit with the same sharp cold. The glaciers groaned and cracked, retreating step by step, leaving behind valleys carved smooth, boulders scattered like forgotten giants, and fertile soils ground from the bones of mountains. The world that emerged was not the same world that had been buried beneath the ice. As the glaciers pulled back, the ocean surged forward. For so long, so much of Earth's water had been locked in frozen prisons, lowering sea levels and exposing hidden landscapes. Land bridges that had carried humans and animals across continents disappeared beneath rising waves. Doggerland, once a wide plain connecting Britain to Europe, sank into the North Sea. Beringia, the frozen highway between Asia and North America, was drowned beneath the Pacific and the Arctic. Islands formed where plains had once stretched, and coasts were swallowed, reshaping human homes and forcing migrations anew. To those who lived it, it must have felt as if the land itself was breathing, shrinking and shifting underfoot. The change was not only in the land but in the air. Winters remained cold, but summers grew longer and warmer. Forests that had been pushed aside by ice crept back into valleys and plains. Grasses gave way to trees, tundra softened into meadows, and wetlands formed where glaciers had melted. Animals that had relied on the frozen steppes, like mammoths, found fewer places to graze, but others flourished in the new habitats. Deer spread into forests, birds filled the skies with migration routes once blocked by ice, and fish swam through rivers that now ran free and untethered by glaciers. For humans, the end of the Ice Age brought both loss and opportunity. The great hunts of mammoths and bison herds began to dwindle, but the land itself opened with new gifts. Fertile soils deposited by glaciers allowed plants to grow in abundance, and with them came a new idea, the beginnings of cultivation. Where once people had roamed endlessly in search of prey, some began to settle, to sow seeds, to shape the land with hands rather than simply follow its rhythms. The long struggle for daily survival slowly shifted toward flourishing. The retreat of the ice also revealed rivers and valleys that became the cradles of civilizations. In time, these landscapes would host farming, villages, and eventually cities. Yet all of this began with the melting of the glaciers, with the slow return of warmth that transformed a frozen Earth into a planet of balance. What had once been a land of death and scarcity began to whisper of abundance. Still, the echoes of the Ice Age never vanished. The memory of fire, of cooperation, of persistence through hardship remained etched in human culture. We carried forward not only the tools and the shelters, but the lessons of resilience that had been carved into us by cold and hunger. And now, as the ice receded into mountains and poles, humans stepped forward into a new age, carrying the spirit of survival into a world that had been remade. And with that remaking came reflection. To exist at all was to be the product of survival stretched over thousands of years, of ancestors who endured when survival seemed impossible. The end of the Ice Age was not only the end of a frozen era, but the beginning of everything that followed the moment life moved from clinging to flourishing and from enduring to imagining. As the last glaciers melted and rivers swelled into their new paths, the world stood changed forever. Forests stretched across valleys, once ground flat by ice. Oceans swallowed coastlines that had once been highways for people and animals, and life began to flourish in ways that would lay the foundation for all of human history. Yet, when we look back on the Ice Age, it is not only a geological chapter, but a story of survival, a story that explains why you, sitting here now, listening in the quiet of your evening or morning, even exist at all. Every breath you take is borrowed from a line of survival that stretched across frozen plains where death was constant. Life clawed its way through storms that could freeze flesh in minutes, through hunger that could starve entire herds, through predators with teeth like knives waiting in the shadows. At every turn, extinction pressed close, yet somehow life refused to yield. Mammoths thundered across tundra, wolves hunted in packs under pale moons, reindeer pressed on against biting winds, and fragile humans, with firelight and fragile tools, clung to one another and found ways to endure. You exist because they did not give up. You are here because countless lives found just enough strength to continue, even when the odds leaned toward silence. It is easy to take our place in the world for granted, to believe survival was inevitable, but the truth is that it was not. The Ice Age could have ended differently. The predators might have triumphed. The herds might have collapsed entirely. The fragile bands of humans, scattered across the world, might never have made it beyond their shelters of hide and bone. Yet they did. And in doing so, they carried forward the spark that burns in you now. It is humbling to imagine. Each of us is a living continuation of that resilience, a thread unbroken through tens of thousands of years. Our DNA holds whispers of those winters, of the firelight reflected in ancient eyes, of the quiet determination to endure. When you feel small beneath the weight of time, remember that your very existence is proof that survival is not just possible, it is extraordinary. The Ice Age reminds us that survival was never guaranteed. The earth is full of bones that testify to that truth. Mammoths, saber-tooths, dire wolves gone forever. They too fought for life, but the balance tipped against them. What remains is not just sadness, but perspective. It shows us that every moment is fragile, and every victory of survival is precious. As you sit here listening, perhaps winding down into rest, let yourself feel the weight of that story. Let it sink into you that the warmth around you, the breath in your lungs, and the life that stretches forward from you are all possible because countless generations before you found ways to endure. They carved meaning in caves, stitched clothing with bone needles, and walked across frozen bridges into lands unknown so that life would continue. And now, I'd like to invite you into this story, not just as a listener, but as a participant. Which Ice Age survivor amazes you most? Is it the reindeer, still roaming the tundra as they did tens of thousands of years ago? Is it the wolves, whose haunting calls still echo across forests and plains? Or perhaps it is humanity itself, fragile and unlikely, yet determined enough to endure what should have been the end. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I love seeing which parts of these ancient stories touch each of you the most. And if you find peace in these journeys through science and time, if you enjoy drifting into sleep with the comfort of knowing that you are part of something vast and extraordinary, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a gentle like and maybe tapped subscribe. It helps this little corner of calm curiosity reach more people and tells the algorithm that sleep and science belong together. For now, take one more slow breath, let your shoulders loosen, let the story settle gently in your mind, and carry with you the quiet truth that we are only here because life endured the coldest trial the earth has ever known. The Ice Age shaped us, tested us, and gave us the resilience that still lingers in every heartbeat today.